Yuri stepped off the transport shuttle and felt the warm, alien sun on her face. The air smelled different here, sweet but also sharp, like metal and flowers mixed together. She looked around at the research station on planet Velrothis. Small buildings made of gray metal sat in a clearing. Beyond them, massive purple trees stretched up into the orange sky. "Welcome to the edge of nowhere," said the station manager through her communicator. "Your quarters are in Building 3. Don't go into the forest alone." Yuri smiled. She had heard that warning 100 times during her training. Everyone was scared of the Velrothi. The galaxy knew them as apex predators. They stood 8 feet tall with 6 legs and scales that could turn almost invisible. They had teeth like knives and claws that could cut through steel. Every species that met them ran away in fear. But Yuri was a xenobiologist. She studied alien life, and she wanted to understand the Velrothi, not fear them. She spent her first day unpacking her equipment. Cameras, scanning devices, data pads, and collection tools filled her small lab. She organized everything carefully. Tomorrow, she would start her real work. That night, Yuri ate a quick meal and sat outside her quarters. The forest made strange sounds, clicks and whistles and low humming noises. She pulled out her datapad and started reading research reports from other scientists. Most of them had only seen Velrothi from far away. No one had spent real time observing them up close. The next morning, she walked to the forest edge. The station had set up observation posts just inside the tree line. Safe spots where researchers could watch without being in danger. Yuri found a comfortable spot beneath a large tree with twisting purple bark. She set up her portable chair and took out her datapad. The forest was beautiful. Light filtered through the leaves in streams of orange and gold. Strange insects buzzed past her head. Small animals made rustling sounds in the bushes. Yuri started taking notes about everything she saw. She didn't know she was being watched. High in the branches above, 3 young Velrothi had frozen in place. Kessa, the oldest, was only 2 seasons old. Her scales were still bright green, not yet darkened to the deep blue of adults. Beside her crouched Vorn, her brother, slightly smaller and more curious than was safe. The third was Rill, their cousin, who always wanted to investigate everything. The 3 cubs had been hunting practice. Their parents taught them to stalk small prey through the trees. But now, they forgot all about hunting. They stared at the strange creature below. "What is it?" Vorn whispered in the clicking language of the Velrothi. "Hairless," Kessa observed. "Soft skin, no claws, no scales." "It's one of the alien things," Rill said. "The ones in the knot den." She meant the research station. "What is it doing?" Vorn asked. That was the mystery. The creature just sat there. It didn't hunt. It didn't eat. It didn't run away or fight. It simply held a flat, glowing object and stared at it. Sometimes the creature touched the object and it changed. Sometimes the creature looked up at the trees or the sky, then looked back at the object. The cubs watched for over an hour. They barely breathed. Their hunting training helped them stay perfectly still. Yuri had no idea 3 of the galaxy's most dangerous predators were 20 feet above her head. She kept reading and taking notes. She was studying reports about Velrothi family groups, how they raised their young, how they hunted together, how they communicated. She found it fascinating. The Velrothi were so much more than just hunters. They had complex social structures. They taught their children through careful demonstration. They showed affection and formed deep bonds with family members. "Look," Kessa whispered suddenly. "It's studying." The other cubs tilted their heads. Studying? What did she mean? "Like Mother does," Kessa explained. "When Mother finds new prey, she watches it. She learns its patterns. She studies it before hunting." "But that thing isn't hunting," Vorn said. Maybe it studies for different reasons, Rill suggested. This was a new concept for the young Velrathi. They studied things to hunt them. But maybe this soft creature studied things just to learn, just to know. The sun moved across the sky. Yuri kept reading. She made notes about behavior patterns. She recorded observations about territory sizes. She cross-referenced data from different sources. The cubs watched every movement. They saw how carefully the creature touched its glowing object. They saw how it would pause and think. They saw how it sometimes made sounds with its mouth, as if talking to itself. It's teaching itself, Kessa decided, like we do with the teaching stones. When Velrathi cubs were very young, their parents would bring them objects to examine, rocks with interesting patterns, pieces of shell from prey animals, seeds from different plants. The cubs would study these objects and learn about their world. Was this creature doing the same thing? As the sun began to set, Yuri stretched and stood up. She packed her datapad carefully into her bag. She looked around the forest one more time, smiling at its beauty. Then she walked back toward the research station. The three cubs watched her go. They looked at each other with wide eyes. "Did you see how carefully it handled the study thing?" Vorn asked. "It must be very important," Rill agreed. "We should tell the others about this," Kessa said. But as they prepared to leave, Vorn had another thought. "What if the creature is a cub too?" The others stared at him. "Think about it," Vorn continued. "It's small. It has no real claws or teeth. It needs that knot den to protect it, and it studies things like we do when we're learning." Kessa and Rill considered this. It made sense. Maybe the hairless creature was a young one of its species. Maybe it came to this world to learn, just like they learned in their hunting grounds. "If it's a cub," Rill said slowly, "then where are its parents? Where are its teachers?" The three young Velrathi looked toward the research station in the distance. They saw no adult creatures that looked like the one they had watched. The hairless thing seemed to be alone. "That's sad," Kessa said softly. "Learning alone is hard." The three cubs climbed down from their tree and headed home to their den, but they kept thinking about the strange creature. The one who studied things so carefully, the one who seemed to be learning all by itself. In her quarters, Yuri made dinner and reviewed her notes. It had been a good first day of observation. Tomorrow she would return to the same spot. Maybe she would see some Velrathi in the distance. Maybe she would start to understand these mysterious creatures better. She had no idea that she had already been observed. She had no idea that three young predators had decided she was interesting. She had no idea that everything was about to change. Outside, in the dark forest, three cubs made a decision. If the strange creature was trying to learn about their world, maybe they could help. After all, that's what adults did for cubs. They taught them. They brought them things to study. Tomorrow, they would bring the hairless creature something to learn about. Something from their world. Something interesting. It seemed like the right thing to do. Yuri woke up early the next morning. She ate breakfast quickly, grabbed her equipment bag, and headed back to her observation spot. The forest looked different in the morning light. Everything seemed fresh and new. Small flying creatures danced between the trees. The purple leaves swayed in a gentle breeze. She set up her chair in the same place as yesterday. She wanted to keep a consistent location for her observations. That's what good scientists did. They controlled variables. They kept things the same so they could notice what changed. She pulled out her datapad and started reviewing yesterday's notes. She wanted to organize her thoughts before beginning today's work. That's when she saw it. Right next to her chair, on a flat rock, sat a large beetle. But not just any beetle. This one was the size of her fist. Its shell shimmered with colors that shifted between blue and green and purple. The colors moved across its back like waves on water. Yuri blinked. She looked around. Had someone from the station left this here? But no one else was doing field work in this area. And why would they leave a beetle? She looked closer at the insect. It was clearly dead, but very recently dead. Its legs were folded neatly beneath it. It sat perfectly centered on the rock, as if someone had placed it there carefully. How strange. Yuri took out her scanner and examined the beetle. She recorded its size, its coloring, its body structure. She took photographs from multiple angles. She made detailed notes about where she found it and what condition it was in. Unknown to her, 3 pairs of eyes watched from the branches above. The cubs had arrived before dawn, carrying their gift. They had argued about what to bring. Kessa wanted to bring a piece of crystal. Vorn wanted to bring an interesting leaf. But Rill had found the rainbow beetle, and they all agreed it was perfect. Now they watched as the hairless creature studied their gift. "Look," Vorn whispered excitedly. "It's using the glowing study thing on our beetle." "It's examining it from all sides," Kessa observed. "Just like Mother taught us." "This was a good choice," Rill said proudly. Yuri spent 20 minutes examining the beetle. She was fascinated by its unusual coloring. The pigmentation seemed to shift with the angle of light. She wondered if it was a defensive mechanism or maybe used for mating displays. She made a note to research this species more when she got back to the station. Finally, she carefully placed the beetle in a collection container. She would preserve it properly later. It was an excellent specimen. She looked around the forest again, puzzled. How had this beetle ended up right next to her chair? Maybe it had just died there naturally? But that seemed like too much of a coincidence. The placement seemed too deliberate. Yuri shrugged and went back to reading her research files. Mysteries of nature happened all the time. She couldn't explain everything. The cubs watched as she returned to her glowing object. They looked at each other with growing excitement. "She kept it," Vorn said. "She studied it very carefully," Rill added. "We should bring more things," Kessa decided. The 3 young Velrathi slipped away silently. They had a mission now. They would find more interesting objects for the creature to study. Yuri spent the morning reading and taking notes about the environment around her. She recorded the temperature, the humidity, and the types of plants nearby. She was building a complete picture of this habitat. After a few hours, she stood up to stretch her legs. She walked a short distance around her observation area, being careful not to go too far. The station's warnings about the forest were serious. She stayed within sight of her chair at all times. When she returned to her spot, she froze. There were more objects on the rock. A twisted root that looked like it had been shaped by wind and water, 3 smooth stones, each a different color. And a piece of something that looked like amber with what appeared to be a small creature trapped inside. Yuri looked around quickly. Nothing moved in the forest. No sounds except the normal buzz and chirp of insects and small animals. Who was leaving these things? Her scientific training took over. She examined each object carefully. The root had an unusual spiral pattern. The stones were perfectly smooth, probably from a riverbed. The amber piece was genuinely interesting. The creature inside looked like a tiny version of the rainbow beetle she had found earlier. She documented everything. She took measurements and photographs. She made detailed notes about the placement of each item. They were arranged in a line as if someone had set them out for display. This was definitely not random. Someone or something was leaving these objects for her. In the trees, the cubs vibrated with happiness. Their scales rippled with pleased colors. The creature was studying their gifts. It examined each one with great care. It used its glowing device on every object. "It likes learning about our world," Rill said. "We're helping it study," Vorn added. "Tomorrow we should bring even better things," Kessa suggested. Yuri packed up the new specimens carefully. Her mind raced with questions. The most obvious answer was that someone from the research station was playing a prank. But that didn't feel right. Everyone at the station was too busy with their own work. And how would they leave these items without her noticing? Could it be the local wildlife? She had read about some earth birds that collected shiny objects. Maybe some creature here had similar behavior, but why bring them to her specifically? And why such a variety of items? The third possibility was the one she barely wanted to consider. Could the Velrothi be doing this? But everything she had read about them suggested they were pure predators. They hunted and killed. They didn't leave gifts of stones and roots. That didn't make sense. Still, she made a note in her research log. Possible interaction with local intelligent life, source of objects unknown, will monitor situation. That evening, back at the station, Yuri showed the specimens to Jiho, the station director. He was an older researcher who had spent 5 years on Velrothis. "Someone's leaving me things," she explained. "At my observation site. I don't know who or why." Jiho examined the objects with interest. "These are good specimens, the amber piece especially. That could be thousands of years old. But who's leaving them?" Jiho shrugged. "Could be anything. Maybe you've attracted some curious wildlife. I've heard stories about the Velrothi doing strange things, but nothing like this. They're predators, not collectors." "Should I be worried?" "I don't think so. If something wanted to hurt you, it would have done so already. Whatever's happening, it seems harmless, maybe even friendly." He smiled. "Enjoy your mystery gift giver. Not many xenobiologists can say they've experienced something like this." That night, Yuri lay in her bed thinking. Friendly. Could something be trying to be friendly? The thought was both exciting and slightly frightening. If something intelligent was reaching out to her, she had to be careful. She had to be respectful. First contact situations could go wrong so easily. She decided to treat the situation like a scientific experiment. She would observe, she would document, she would not make assumptions. And she would see what happened next. In the forest, 3 young Velrothi cubs slept in their den. They dreamed of tomorrow. They had already planned what to bring next. A flower that glowed in the dark, a piece of shell with interesting patterns, maybe even a small crystal from the cave system. The hairless creature wanted to learn about their world, and they were happy to teach it. That's what you did for cubs who were trying to study and grow. You helped them. You brought them things to examine. You made learning easier. They didn't know they were creating something unprecedented in galactic history. They didn't know that their simple act of kindness would change how 2 species understood each other. They only knew that helping felt right. And tomorrow, they would help again. 5 days had passed since Yuri first found the rainbow beetle. Every morning, she arrived at her observation spot to find new objects waiting for her. Every morning, she documented them carefully. The collection was growing impressive. Flowers in colors she had never seen, seeds from different plants, pieces of bone that showed interesting wear patterns, fragments of minerals that sparkled in the sunlight. Each item taught her something new about the Velrothi ecosystem. But today was different. Yuri approached her observation spot and stopped walking. Her heart beat faster. On the rock where gifts usually appeared, something was moving. It was a snake-like creature, about 3 feet long. It had 6 small legs along its body and scales that shifted between red and black. Its head swiveled toward her and it hissed. The sound made her take a step backward. The creature was very much alive. Yuri stared at it for a long moment. This changed things. Before, the gifts had been safe objects, things she could pick up and examine without risk. But a living, possibly dangerous creature, that was a different situation entirely. She slowly set down her equipment bag. She pulled out her scanner and examined the creature from a safe distance. The device identified it as a Velrothi serpent, venomous but not deadly to humans. Its bite would hurt and cause swelling, but it wouldn't kill her. Still, she didn't want to get bitten. The serpent hissed again and tried to move, but something was wrong with it. Yuri looked closer. The creature seemed sluggish. Its movements were slow and uncoordinated. Had it been injured? Or maybe drugged somehow? Above her, the three cubs watched anxiously. This had been Vorn's idea. He had insisted that living creatures were more interesting to study than dead objects. But catching the serpent had been difficult, and keeping it calm had been even harder. They had to be very gentle so it wouldn't be too scared. "Is the creature going to study it?" Rill whispered. "I don't know," Kessa said. "It looks worried." "Maybe we made a mistake," Vorn admitted. Yuri made a decision. She pulled on thick gloves from her equipment bag. She approached the serpent carefully. The creature hissed but didn't strike. She could see now that it was definitely sedated somehow. Its reactions were too slow. She managed to pick up the serpent and place it in a secure container. She would release it later, far from the research station. For now, she took detailed scans and photographs. Despite the surprise, it was an excellent specimen. She learned more about Velrathi serpents in 20 minutes than she had from reading reports. After she released the serpent into the forest, she sat down and thought hard. Someone was definitely leaving these things for her, and that someone had the ability to catch and sedate a dangerous creature. That took intelligence and skill. The Velrathi. It had to be. But why? The next morning, Yuri was more cautious when she approached her spot. What she found made her laugh, despite herself. A large pile of mushrooms, at least 20 different varieties. They were arranged in a careful circle. Some of them glowed faintly. Others were bright colors that screamed, "Don't eat me." A few looked perfectly ordinary. Yuri spent 2 hours examining them. She discovered that 3 species were completely unknown to science. She would get to name them. But she also discovered that 5 of the mushrooms were highly toxic. One species produced spores that could cause hallucinations. Another would cause painful blisters on skin contact. Whoever was leaving these gifts didn't seem to understand that some things were dangerous for her. That afternoon, she returned to find more items. A beautiful crystal that hummed when she touched it. A piece of tree bark with intricate insect tunnels carved through it. And horrifyingly, a chunk of what looked like a large nest. Yuri recognized it immediately from her research. It was part of a Velrathi adult's nest, and it was still active. She could see eggs inside it. Small movements suggested there were larvae, too. She backed away quickly. Taking pieces of a Velrathi nest was incredibly dangerous. Adult Velrathi were extremely protective of their young. If a parent found its nest damaged, it would hunt down the threat without mercy. "Okay," Yuri said out loud. "We need to have a talk about what's appropriate." She carefully, very carefully, picked up the nest piece using long tongs. She carried it deep into the forest and left it where adult Velrathi might find it. She hoped they would accept it back. She hoped they wouldn't think she had stolen it. When she got back to the research station that evening, she looked stressed. Jiho noticed immediately. "Bad day?" he asked. "My gift giver is getting out of hand," Yuri explained. She told him about the live serpent, the toxic mushrooms, and the nest piece. Jiho's expression grew serious. "The nest is particularly concerning. If adult Velrathi think you're a threat to their young—" "I know." Yuri rubbed her temples. "I think whoever is doing this is trying to help. They're bringing me things to study. But they don't understand that some things are dangerous for me. Do you still think it's the Velrathi?" "I'm almost certain now. The variety of items, the way they're collected, the fact that they include prey animals and plant life and minerals. It's too thoughtful to be random. Someone is deliberately showing me their world." Jiho leaned back in his chair. "You know what this sounds like? It sounds like teaching behavior. When Velrathi adults teach their cubs, they bring them specimens to examine. They show them what's safe to eat, what's dangerous, what's useful. Maybe someone thinks they're teaching you." Yuri considered this. It made sense, but it created a new question. Why would Velrathi want to teach a human? Maybe they're curious about you, too. Over the next 3 days, the gifts continued. They became even more elaborate. Yuri found pieces of technology from an old crashed ship. She found samples of every type of soil from the region. She found a collection of different animal claws, all carefully arranged by size. Her small lab was becoming a museum. Every surface was covered with specimens. She had to set up additional storage containers just to hold everything. She spent hours each day cataloging and organizing. The other researchers at the station started visiting just to see the collection. Everyone had theories about who was leaving the gifts. Some thought it was an intelligent animal. Others believed it might be a Velrathi who had been exposed to humans before and learned to be curious rather than aggressive. A few insisted it was just an elaborate prank. But Yuri was becoming certain of one thing. Her gift giver was young. The selections were too enthusiastic, too random in their danger level. An adult would know not to bring toxic mushrooms or nest pieces. An adult would be more careful. She was being adopted by children, young Velrathi who thought she needed to learn about their world. The thought made her smile even as it worried her. It was adorable in a terrifying way. These were still apex predators, even if they were young. They could hurt her easily if they wanted to, but instead, they were trying to teach her. One morning, she decided to try something. She brought items from the research station to leave at her observation spot. A simple compass, a small mirror, a piece of metal that the station didn't need. She arranged them on the rock where gifts usually appeared. Then she sat in her chair and pretended to read her data pad. But really, she was watching carefully. For 2 hours, nothing happened. She started to think her experiment had failed. Maybe her gift givers only came before dawn. Then she heard it. The softest sound, a slight rustle of leaves above her head. Yuri kept her eyes on her data pad. She didn't look up. She didn't want to scare away whatever was there. Another small sound. Closer this time. She held her breath. This was it. She was about to discover who had been leaving her gifts. In the tree above, 3 young Velrathi stared down at the objects the creature had left. Their eyes were wide with wonder. The creature was leaving things for them to study? Just like they left things for it? This changed everything. Kessa reached down carefully with one clawed hand. She picked up the mirror. In its surface, she saw her own reflection. She jumped back, startled, nearly falling from the branch. Vorn grabbed the compass. It pointed towards something no matter how he turned it. Magic? Or some kind of technology? Rill examined the metal piece. It was smooth and cold and didn't exist in nature. The creature had made this. It came from the knot den. The 3 cubs looked at each other with new understanding. The creature wasn't just studying their world. It wanted to share its world, too. This was an exchange, a trade of knowledge. This was the beginning of something neither species had words for yet, something that would change both their futures forever. Nari arrived at the research station on a cold morning. She was a xenoanthropologist, someone who studied alien cultures and behaviors. Jiho had called her in after hearing about Yuri's situation. He thought they needed an expert in interspecies communication. Yuri met her at the landing pad. "Thank you for coming on such short notice." Nari smiled warmly. "Are you kidding? This is the most interesting thing I've heard in years. A possible teaching exchange with Velrathi? I wouldn't miss this." They walked to Yuri's lab. The room was packed with specimens and objects. Every shelf and table was covered. Nari walked slowly through the space, examining everything with keen eyes. "Tell me about the pattern," Nari said. "How do the gifts appear?" "Every morning," Yuri explained. "Sometimes just 1 or 2 items, sometimes dozens. They're always at my observation spot, arranged carefully, never scattered or dropped randomly." "And you left items for them?" 3 days ago, a mirror, a compass, and a piece of metal. All 3 were gone the next morning." Nari picked up one of the glowing mushrooms, now preserved in a container. You said some of these items were dangerous to you? Yes. Toxic mushrooms. A live venomous serpent. A piece of active Velrothi nest. Whoever is doing this doesn't understand what's safe for humans. That's actually the most telling detail, Nari said. She turned to face Yuri directly. You're being treated like a Velrothi cub, a young one who needs to learn. Yuri sat down slowly. Explain. Nari pulled out her own datapad and showed Yuri some research files. I've studied Velrothi family structures for 8 years. When cubs are very young, their parents bring them everything. Food, yes, but also objects to examine. Dangerous plants so they learn to avoid them. Prey animals so they learn to hunt. Pieces of nests so they understand their own species. They don't sort by safety level? No. They bring everything, and the cubs learn through experience. A cub touches a toxic plant and gets a mild irritation. Next time, it knows to avoid that plant. It's learning through exposure, with parents nearby to help if something goes wrong. Yuri felt pieces clicking into place in her mind. So they're bringing me dangerous things, because that's how they were taught? Exactly. They don't realize you're from a different species with different vulnerabilities. To them, you're just a cub who needs to learn about the world, and they're trying to help. Young Velrothi, then. Cubs themselves? Almost certainly. Adults would be more careful. They would observe you first and learn what you can and can't handle. Cubs are enthusiastic. They want to share everything at once. Nari smiled. It's actually quite sweet when you think about it. Sweet and terrifying, Yuri muttered. The fact that you left items and they took them is even more significant, Nari continued. They didn't just take them as trophies. If they had, you would have found them destroyed or scattered. But they were gone completely, which means the cubs took them back to examine. They're studying your offerings just like you study theirs. So what do I do now? Nari thought for a moment. You have an incredible opportunity here. This is the first recorded case of voluntary interspecies teaching exchange. The Velrothi are usually too aggressive to approach, but these cubs have decided you're worth their time and effort. You can build on that. How? Treat it like what it is, a classroom. Bring them items that teach them about humans and human technology. Simple things at first, and accept their gifts gracefully. Study what they bring. Show them that you value their lessons. Yuri felt both excited and nervous. This could change everything we know about Velrothi. It could change everything about how different species interact, Nari corrected. If we can teach the galaxy that even apex predators can be approached through education and mutual curiosity, that's enormous. The next morning, Yuri prepared carefully. She brought a variety of items to her observation spot. A flashlight that she could turn on and off, a music box that played a simple tune, a book with pictures of Earth animals, a small magnet and some metal pieces. She arranged them on the rock and then sat down to wait. This time she didn't pretend to read. She sat quietly, watching the trees above. An hour passed. Then another. The sun climbed higher in the orange sky. Then she saw movement. Just a flicker of green scales against purple bark. High up in the branches, something was watching her. Yuri kept very still. She didn't point. She didn't stare directly. She just stayed calm and relaxed. More movement. Now she could see 3 shapes. They were small, only about 4 feet long. Their scales were bright green, the color of young Velrothi. They moved with the careful grace of natural hunters. One of them climbed down lower. It hung from a branch about 15 feet above the ground, staring at the items Yuri had brought. Its eyes were large and golden, and incredibly intelligent. Yuri slowly reached into her bag. She pulled out the flashlight and turned it on. She pointed the beam at a nearby tree trunk. All 3 cubs froze, their eyes locked onto the light. Yuri moved the beam slowly across the ground. The cubs' heads followed it. She could see their hunting instincts activating. They wanted to chase the light. She turned the flashlight off, then on again. Off. On. The cubs chittered to each other in their clicking language. Yuri couldn't understand the words, but she understood the tone. They were amazed. She set down the flashlight and picked up the music box. She wound the key and opened the lid. The simple melody filled the clearing. The cubs' reaction was immediate. They climbed down lower, drawn by the sound. Their scales rippled with colors that Yuri had learned meant curiosity and pleasure. They came within 10 feet of her, close enough that she could see every detail of their faces. They were beautiful and young and so very curious. The music box wound down and stopped. The cubs chittered again, this time with what sounded like disappointment. Yuri wound it again. The music played. The cubs swayed slightly, as if dancing. When it stopped the second time, the cubs didn't ask for more. Instead, the largest one climbed back up into the tree. It disappeared for a moment, then returned carrying something. The cub dropped down to a lower branch. It carefully dropped the object onto the rock where Yuri's gifts sat. It was a flower, but not just any flower. This one pulsed with bioluminescent light. Blue and white patterns flowed across its petals like breathing. Yuri stood slowly. She walked to the rock and picked up the flower. She held it up so the cubs could see her examining it. She pulled out her scanner and studied it carefully, making sure they saw every step. The cubs watched intently. When she finished, she carefully placed the flower in a collection container. Then she looked up at them and smiled. "Thank you," she said softly. "It's beautiful." The cubs didn't understand her words, but they understood her tone. They understood that she valued their gift. The second cub climbed down now. It was slightly smaller and seemed more cautious. It approached the rock and carefully picked up the magnet. It examined it from all sides. Then it brought the magnet near the metal pieces Yuri had left. The metal jumped toward the magnet. The cub dropped both items in surprise and scrambled backward. Yuri couldn't help it. She laughed. It was a gentle laugh, not mocking. Just delighted by the cub's reaction. The cub tilted its head at her. Then it picked up the magnet again, more carefully this time. It experimented with the metal pieces, learning how they attracted and repelled. The third cub, the smallest, grabbed the book. It opened the cover carefully with its claws. The pages showed pictures of lions, elephants, whales, Earth's animals. The small cub studied each page intently. It pointed at the pictures and chittered to its companions. They were comparing, Yuri realized. They were looking at Earth's predators and comparing them to Velrathi hunting styles. For 2 hours, the cubs examined the items Yuri had brought. They tested everything. They shared discoveries with each other. And occasionally they would look at Yuri as if checking to see if they were doing it right. Yuri watched them with wonder. She made quiet notes. She took careful photographs. But mostly, she just observed this incredible moment. These were predators. In a few years, they would be 8 feet tall and feared across the galaxy. But right now, they were children. Curious, playful, eager to learn. And they had chosen to learn with her. When the sun began to set, the cubs carefully arranged the items they had examined. They placed them back on the rock, organized neatly. Then the largest cub looked at Yuri directly. It made a sound, not a threat, not a warning, just a sound that seemed to mean goodbye. Then the 3 cubs climbed back into the trees and disappeared. Yuri sat in her chair for a long time after they left. Her hands were shaking slightly, not from fear, from excitement, from the realization of what had just happened. She had just taught 3 Velrathi cubs about human technology, and they had taught her about trust, about curiosity crossing species boundaries, about the universal language of wanting to learn. When she got back to the station, Nari was waiting eagerly. "Well?" Yuri smiled, wider than she had in months. We need a bigger classroom. 6 months passed like a dream. Yuri's observation spot had transformed completely. What started as a simple chair under a tree had become something extraordinary. She had set up multiple display tables. Each one held different types of items. Technology on one table, natural specimens on another, art and cultural objects on a third. The three cubs, Kessa, Vorn, and Rill, came every day now. Yuri had learned their names by careful observation of how they interacted. She had learned their personalities. Kessa was thoughtful and careful. Vorn was brave and curious. Rill was gentle and artistic. But they didn't come alone anymore. It started in the 2nd month. The three cubs brought 2 more young Velrathi. These were their siblings, slightly younger and very shy. They watched from the trees for a week before finally coming down to examine the objects. Then came cousins, then friends. Within 4 months, Yuri was regularly teaching groups of 8 to 10 young Velrathi. They ranged in age from very small cubs who could barely climb to adolescents who were already 5 feet long. The cubs brought their parents. That had been the most terrifying and amazing day of Yuri's life. She had arrived one morning to find 2 full-grown Velrathi adults waiting near her teaching area. They were massive, 8 feet tall with scales that shimmered deep blue and black. Their claws could cut through steel. Their teeth could crush bone. Yuri had frozen in place, her heart pounding. But the adults hadn't attacked. They had simply watched, observed. As their cubs brought items to show Yuri, the parents stayed back, monitoring carefully. After an hour, they had left, but the message was clear. They approved. They trusted Yuri with their young. Now it was a regular occurrence. Adult Velrathi would appear, watch the teaching sessions, and sometimes even bring their own contributions. One mother brought a perfectly preserved insect trapped in tree sap. A father brought a stone carved with ancient Velrathi markings. Yuri learned to read their body language. She learned which colors on their scales meant curiosity versus concern. She learned their clicking language slowly, with the cubs patiently teaching her simple words. The research station had to adapt, too. More supplies were needed, more equipment, more staff to help document everything. That's when Taiho arrived. He was a younger researcher, fresh from university, specializing in interspecies contact protocols. Jiho had requested him specifically. The situation with the Velrathi was growing beyond what Yuri could handle alone. Taiho stepped off the transport shuttle and immediately started asking questions. How many Velrathi are we in contact with? What's the communication level? Are there any aggression incidents? Yuri met him with an amused smile. Why don't I just show you? She led him through the forest to her teaching area. What he saw made him stop walking. 15 young Velrathi were gathered around the display tables. They examined items carefully. They chittered to each other in their language. Some were using tools Yuri had provided to take apart a broken communicator, learning how it worked. 4 adult Velrathi watched from the edges of the clearing. They were relaxed, their scales showing calm colors. And in the middle of it all sat Yuri, helping a small cub understand how a simple battery worked. Taiho stared. His mouth hung open. Finally, he managed to speak. This is impossible. It's happening every day, Yuri said cheerfully. Over the next weeks, Taiho integrated into the teaching program. He brought his expertise in contact protocols. He helped establish better communication methods. He set up recording equipment to document everything. But more importantly, he brought enthusiasm. He saw what Yuri had created and he wanted to expand it. We need to formalize this, he said one evening over dinner. Create a real curriculum, not just random objects, but structured lessons. The cubs might not want structure, Yuri warned. They like exploring freely. Then we adapt. We make structure that feels like exploration. Together, they created what they called the exchange program. On certain days, they focused on technology. The cubs learned about computers, engines, and tools. On other days, they focused on culture. Yuri shared stories, music, and art from Earth and other human worlds. In return, the Velrathi taught them hunting techniques, plant identification, and territorial navigation. The cubs showed them how to read weather patterns in the forest. They demonstrated tracking skills. They shared their own art, creating patterns in sand and arranging natural objects in beautiful designs. The adult Velrathi became more involved. One father figure started teaching both Yuri and Taiho how to move silently through the forest. A mother taught them which plants were medicinal. An elder, scales grayed with age, told them stories through gestures and sounds. Stories about Velrathi history and legends. News of the program spread. Other research stations heard about the unprecedented peaceful contact with Velrathi. Scientists from across the galaxy requested permission to visit. Diplomats wanted to understand how this had happened. But Jiho was protective. He limited visitors. He didn't want the teaching environment disrupted. This wasn't a zoo or a performance. This was genuine interspecies education, and it needed to be respected. One morning, 6 months after it all began, something remarkable happened. Yuri arrived at the teaching area to find not just cubs and their parents, but an entire extended family group. 20 Velrathi, ranging from tiny cubs to ancient elders. They had arranged themselves in a semicircle around the clearing. In the center, they had placed items. Dozens of items, a comprehensive collection representing their entire culture, weapons and tools, art pieces and ritual objects, food and medicine, historical artifacts and modern creations. The largest adult, a scarred male who appeared to be the family leader, stepped forward. He looked at Yuri directly, then he made a gesture. It was a Velrathi sign she had learned. It meant teacher. It meant respect. Yuri felt tears in her eyes. She made the gesture back to him. Teacher. Respect. The male nodded. Then he began to teach. For hours, he and the other adults explained their culture. They showed Yuri and Taiho how each item was made and what it meant. They shared knowledge that had been passed down through generations. The cubs watched their elders with pride. Kessa, Vorn, and Rill sat closest to Yuri, occasionally translating when she didn't understand a gesture or sound. When the sun began to set, the Velrathi family prepared to leave. But before they went, the scarred male approached Yuri one more time. He carefully placed an object in her hands. It was a small carved stone. The carving showed a human figure and a Velrathi figure sitting together. Between them was a symbol. Yuri didn't need translation for this one. The symbol meant learning. It meant sharing. It meant friendship. "Thank you," she whispered. The male made a rumbling sound deep in his chest. It was the Velrathi equivalent of a laugh. Then he and his family disappeared into the forest. That evening, the research team gathered in the station's common area. Yuri placed the carved stone on the table where everyone could see it. "We need to write a comprehensive report," Taiho said. "The scientific community needs to know what we've achieved here." "Not just scientific," Nari added. She had extended her stay to help document the cultural aspects. "This is historical. This is the first time humans and Velrathi have formed genuine bonds." Jiho smiled. "Do you know what I think is most important? It started with 3 curious cubs. 3 young Velrathi who saw a human reading and thought she needed help learning. No diplomacy, no formal contact protocols, just natural curiosity and kindness." Yuri looked at the carved stone. "They saw me as someone who wanted to learn, and instead of seeing that as weakness, they saw it as something to nurture." "That's very Velrathi," Nari said. "Their entire culture is built on teaching the young. They value knowledge transfer above almost everything else. When they recognized that trait in you, they responded to it instinctively." "And now?" Taiho asked. "Where do we go from here?" "We keep teaching," Yuri said simply. "We keep learning. We document everything and share it with the galaxy. We show other species that contact doesn't have to be based on trade agreements or military posturing. It can be based on curiosity and education. The cubs are getting older, Jiho noted. In a few years, they'll be adults, fully grown hunters. But they'll remember this, Yuri said confidently. They'll remember that humans were their teachers, that we shared knowledge with them freely. And maybe, when they're adults, they'll teach their own cubs that humans aren't prey or enemies. We're partners in learning. Taiho raised his glass. To the best classroom in the galaxy. They all raised their glasses together. Outside in the forest, 3 young Velrothi sat in their den. Kessa, Vorn, and Rill were tired but happy. They had spent the day teaching the hairless creature about seasonal migration patterns. Tomorrow, the creature would teach them about something called mathematics. "Do you remember when we thought it was a helpless cub?" Vorn asked. Kessa rumbled with amusement. It was helpless. It couldn't hunt. It couldn't climb. It couldn't even change its skin color. But it could study, Rill said softly. It could learn. And it wanted to share that learning with us. Mother says the human has taught our entire family group more about the galaxy than all our ancestors combined, Kessa said. And we taught it how to survive in our forest, Vorn added proudly. The 3 young Velrothi curled up together to sleep. They dreamed of tomorrow's lessons. They dreamed of new things to discover and share. They didn't know that what they had started would spread, that other Velrothi families would hear about the teaching exchange, that within a decade, peaceful contact between humans and Velrothi would become common across multiple worlds. They didn't know that their simple act of bringing a beetle to a curious human would change galactic history. They only knew that learning was good, sharing was good, and the strange, hairless creature with the glowing study thing was a friend. That was enough. The end.